I'm Aubrey Miller, 49 years old, and I built my life from the ground up. From a latchkey kid raised by a single mother to a flag officer in the United States Navy, entrusted with the lives of thousands. For years, I did everything I could to support the one person who always supported me, my mother. But the moment I stepped through the front door, the smell of cheap stale tobacco and a blaring TV replaced the familiar scent of my mother's apple cinnamon candles. A stranger was sitting in my late father's recliner, his feet propped up on the coffee table. He looked at me, a woman who had just commanded 5,000 sailors across the Pacific, and smirked. "Hey there, Missy," he grunted, not bothering to stand. "Your mom's busy cooking my dinner. Don't just stand there, take that bag into the kitchen." He didn't know who I was. He looked at my wet raincoat and saw a failure. Worse, he was turning my mother into a servant in her own home. He proudly flashed his retired colonel's watch to intimidate me. He had no idea that inside the bag I was carrying, there was a level of authority that would make him snap to attention and tremble. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that subscribe button if you believe in this simple truth. Never underestimate a woman just because she's silent. The September rain in Virginia Beach is never just rain. It's a relentless gray sheet of water that tries to wash the pavement clean. I'd been driving for 4 hours, fighting the traffic coming out of Norfolk, my windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. All I wanted, all I craved, was the silence of my childhood home. I wanted to hug my mother, maybe drink a glass of iced tea, and sleep for 14 hours. I turned onto the familiar cul-de-sac, the tires of my sedan crunching over the wet leaves. That's when I saw it. There was a truck parked in the driveway. Not just parked, it was dominating the space. It was a Ford F-150, lifted high enough to require a stepladder, painted a matte black that screamed midlife crisis. It was double parked, taking up the center of the driveway, forcing me to park my modest sedan on the street, half in a puddle. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. My father had built that driveway. He always taught me to park to the side, to leave room for others. It was a small thing, but in the military and in life, the small things tell you everything you need to know about a person's discipline. Whoever owned this truck had none. I took a deep breath, grabbed my leather overnight bag from the passenger seat, and made a dash for the porch. The humidity hit me instantly, clinging to my skin. I shook off my umbrella, smoothed down my wet hair, a practical pixie cut that had served me well at sea, and unlocked the door. I expected the smell of baking. My mother, Maggie, always baked when she knew I was coming home. Apple pie, or maybe her cinnamon casserole. Instead, I was hit by a wall of stale air. It smelled like cheap menthol cigarettes and Old Spice applied too heavily to cover up the scent of sweat. "Is that you, Maggie? Bring me a beer while you're up," a voice boomed from the living room. It wasn't a question, it was a command. I walked into the living room, water dripping from my coat onto the hardwood floor. The TV was blaring, Fox Sports, volume turned up to 50. And there, occupying the sanctuary of my father's old leather recliner, was a man I had never met. He was large, taking up the entire chair. He wore a pastel yellow polo shirt tucked tightly into khaki shorts, highlighting a stomach that had seen too many backyard barbecues. He didn't stand up when I entered. In the South, a gentleman stands when a lady enters the room. In the military, a subordinate stands when a superior enters. This man did neither. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering judgmentally on my plain rain jacket, my lack of makeup, and my sensible travel shoes. "You must be the daughter," he said, shifting his weight but keeping his feet firmly planted on the coffee table, my mother's antique coffee table. He extended a hand lazily toward me, wrist limp, not bothering to lift his elbow off the armrest. I took his hand. It was clammy. A dead fish handshake. I gave it a firm, short squeeze and let go immediately. "Aubrey Miller," I said, my voice calm. "Mark Hensley," he replied, pointing a thumb at his chest. "Retired Air Force, Colonel, 06. Did 25 years, flown sorties you couldn't even dream of." He waited for me to be impressed. When I didn't gasp in awe, he squinted at me. Your mom said you were in the service. Navy, right? That's right, I said. He chuckled, a wet, rattling sound. Judging by the getup, I'm guessing you're enlisted. Petty officer? Maybe a yeoman handling paperwork. It's good work for a gal. Keeps you organized. I felt a flash of heat rise up my neck, but my face remained like stone. It was a look I had perfected over 25 years of service. I thought of the 2 silver stars currently tucked away in the velvet box inside my bag. Rear Admiral. 07. I outranked this man in every possible way. But I remembered the words of Colin Powell, a man I had admired my entire career. Never let your ego get so close to your position that when your position goes, your ego goes with it. This man, this colonel, was all ego. If I corrected him now, it would just be a shouting match. I needed intel. I needed to see how deep this rot went. I work in the industry, I said simply, neither confirming nor denying. Right. Well, good for you, Missy, he said, turning his attention back to the football game. Don't worry, we'll make a soldier out of you yet. Just then, the kitchen door swung open. Aubrey? My mother came rushing out. She looked smaller than I remembered. She was wearing a heavy apron, her gray hair pulled back in a frantic bun. She smelled like frying grease, not apples. She hurried toward me, her arms open. But before she reached me, her eyes darted toward Mark. She checked his face, gauging his reaction, before she dared to hug her own daughter. That hesitation broke my heart more than the stranger in the chair. Oh, honey, you're soaking wet, she whispered, hugging me tight. She felt frail. I'm so glad you're here, Mark. This is my Aubrey. We met, Mark grunted, waving a hand dismissively without looking away from the TV. She seems quiet. Not much of a talker, is she? Mom pulled back, a nervous smile plastered on her face. She's just tired, Mark. She drove a long way. Well, Mark said, slapping the armrest of the recliner. Don't just stand there dripping water on the floor, Missy. Your mom is putting the finishing touches on my dinner. Be a good girl and take that bag to the kitchen, out of the way. And grab me a coaster for this beer, Maggie. I told you about the rings on the table. I looked at my mother. She flinched. She actually flinched at his tone. Then she looked at me, her eyes pleading. Please don't make a scene. Please just go along with it. I looked at Mark's back. He had already dismissed me. He thought I was a nobody. He thought he was the alpha male, the king of this castle, ruling over 2 helpless women. I tightened my grip on the handle of my bag, the bag that held my identity, my achievements, and the authority to crush his little ego into dust. Sure, I said, my voice dangerously level. I'll take the bag to the kitchen. I walked past him. I didn't stomp. I didn't sigh. I moved with the silent, predatory grace of a destroyer cutting through dark water. He thought he had won this round. He thought he had established dominance. He had no idea he had just given orders to a rear admiral. And as I pushed open the kitchen door, leaving him to his football game, I began to formulate a plan. The storm outside was nothing compared to what was brewing inside me. The dining room table is the altar of the American family. It's where you give thanks, where you share your day, and where the hierarchy of the household is silently established. In the Miller house, my father had always sat at the head of the table, facing the window. It wasn't about dominance. It was about protection. He liked to see who was coming up the driveway. Since he passed, that chair had remained empty, a silent tribute. Tonight, Mark Hensley was sitting in it. He had spread himself out, elbows wide on the table, claiming the space as if he had conquered it. When I walked in from the kitchen carrying the pitcher of iced tea, the sight of him in that specific chair made my stomach turn over. It felt like a violation. Sit anywhere, kiddo, Mark said, gesturing with a fork to the side chair, the guest chair. Don't be shy. I set the pitcher down with a little more force than necessary. The ice cubes clattered against the glass. I took the seat to his right, the spot I used to sit in when I was 10 years old. Mom came in from the kitchen, carefully balancing a steaming ceramic dish with oven mitts. It was her signature chicken and rice casserole, the ultimate comfort food. Cream of mushroom soup, shredded chicken, wild rice, and that crispy onion topping that she only made for special occasions. The smell of it usually transported me back to safer, simpler times. "Here we go," Mom said, her voice a little breathless, as she set the trivet down in front of Mark. She looked at him, her eyes wide and hopeful, waiting for approval. Mark didn't even look at her. He reached for the serving spoon and heaped a massive pile onto his plate before Mom or I had even touched our napkins. Then, before taking a single bite, before even testing the temperature, he grabbed the salt shaker. He shook it vigorously over the casserole. Then he grabbed the pepper grinder and cranked it over the food for a solid 10 seconds. "Mark," Mom said softly, "you haven't tasted it yet. I put plenty of seasoning in the sauce this time." Mark finally took a bite, chewing with his mouth half open, a smacking sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. He swallowed and shook his head. "Bland, Maggie. It's just bland. You always go light on the salt. You gotta cook with flavor, like the French. I had this dish in Paris back in '88 that would blow your mind. This? Well, this is fine for home cooking, I guess." I saw my mother's shoulders slump. The light in her eyes flickered out. She sat down silently and took a tiny spoonful of rice, not looking at either of us. My hands were clenched in my lap. "It smells delicious, Mom," I said, making sure my voice carried across the table. "I've missed this. The galley food on the ship is nothing compared to your cooking." Mark snorted. "Galley food? Yeah, I remember the mess halls. Slop on a shingle." He took a long swig of his beer. "But you know, in the Air Force, officers ate like kings. When I was stationed at Ramstein Air Base in Germany during the Cold War, we had filet mignon every Friday night. The O Club there was legendary." And so it began. The Mark Hensley Show. For the next 20 minutes, I didn't get a word in. Neither did Mom. Mark launched into a monologue that was clearly rehearsed, a greatest hits collection of his career. He talked about the wall coming down as if he had personally pushed the bricks over. He talked about flying sorties near the Russian border. His descriptions filled with jargon that sounded impressive to a civilian, but sounded completely off to me. "I was pulling 6 Gs, he boasted, waving his fork in the air. Inverted. The MiG was right on my tail, but I knew I had the better turn radius. You have to have ice in your veins for that kind of work, Aubrey. You Navy folks, you just float around in circles waiting for something to happen. Up there, it's pure predatory instinct." I took a sip of my tea, analyzing him. He claimed to be an 06, a colonel. But his stories were full of holes. He mixed up his aircraft capabilities. He talked about tactics that weren't introduced until the Gulf War, claiming he used them in the '80s. He was puffing his chest, a rooster trying to impress the hens. "Actually," I said, seizing a rare pause while he chewed a mouthful of bread, "we had a pretty intense deployment this time. We navigated a carrier strike group through a typhoon in the South Pacific. 5,000 sailors, 70 aircraft, and waves crashing over the flight deck. The logistical coordination alone was—" "Boring," Mark interrupted. He didn't just speak over me, he waved his hand in front of my face as if shooing away a fly. "Come on, nobody wants to hear about logistics, Missy. That's paperwork. That's glorified traffic control." He leaned in, looking at me with a patronizing smirk that made my skin crawl. "You see, that's the difference. You manage people. I manage machines. Deadly machines. You're a manager. I was a warrior. There's a difference in the DNA." I felt the blood rushing to my ears. I wanted to tell him that, as a rear admiral, I commanded more firepower with a single word than he had ever seen in his entire career. I wanted to tell him that logistics won wars. I wanted to tell him that managing people meant holding the lives of young men and women in my hands every single day. But I looked at Mom. She was pushing a green bean around her plate with her fork, creating little patterns in the gravy. She wasn't eating, she was shrinking. "Mom," I said, trying to bypass Mark entirely, "how is the volunteering going? You were working at the VA hospital library, right? Reading to the veterans?" Mom looked up, a faint spark returning. "Oh, yes, it's wonderful. There's this one gentleman, Mr. Henderson. He's 90 years old, and he loves historical fiction. I found this new book about—" Maggie, stop, Mark groaned, rolling his eyes. Aubrey doesn't want to hear about you shelving dusty books for senile old men. It's depressing. Besides, I told you, you spend too much gas money driving out there. You should be focusing on the house. The gutters are full of leaves. I enjoy it, Mark, Mom whispered, her voice trembling. You enjoy wasting time, Mark corrected her, his tone shifting from boastful to sharp. And this chicken is dry. Pass the gravy. Mom stopped talking. She picked up the gravy boat and passed it to him with a shaking hand. Sorry, Mark. It's okay, babe, he said, winking at her, a sudden and terrifying switch back to fake charm. I still love you, even if you can't cook. I sat there, frozen. The food in my mouth tasted like ash. This wasn't just a bad dinner guest. This wasn't just a jerk. This was a man who needed to make everyone else small so he could feel big. He was systematically dismantling my mother's personality. He had taken the vibrant, chatty, community-loving woman I knew and turned her into someone who apologized for dry chicken in her own house. I looked at Mark, watching him wipe his mouth with the back of his hand. He caught me staring. What's the matter, kiddo? He grinned. Cat got your tongue? Or is the military life too tough for you to talk about? I'm just listening, Mark, I said softly, my voice steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. I'm learning a lot. And I was. I was learning exactly where his weak points were. I was learning that his arrogance was a shield for mediocrity. And I was realizing that the battle I came home to fight wasn't going to be won with missiles or destroyers. It was going to be won at this dining table, and I needed to choose the perfect moment to strike. But not yet. The night was young, and he had barely started drinking. So, Mark said, leaning back and patting his stomach, let's talk about you, 49 and still single. We need to fix that. I gripped my fork until my knuckles turned white. Here it comes. The silence after dinner wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the humid air before a tornado touches down. I helped Mom clear the table, my movements mechanical, while Mark retired to the living room. He didn't offer to carry a single plate. In his world, domestic labor was women's work, regardless of rank or exhaustion. When I walked into the living room 10 minutes later, the air had changed. A thick, pungent gray cloud hung suspended in the center of the room. Mark was leaning back in my father's recliner, a glass of amber liquid, my father's good Kentucky bourbon that he saved for Christmas, balancing on his knee. In his other hand was a cigar. It wasn't a good cigar. It was a cheap gas station stogie that smelled like burning tires and wet cardboard. My mother stopped in the doorway behind me. She let out a small, involuntary cough. Mark, she whispered, her voice trembling. I thought we agreed. No smoking inside. The drapes hold the smell so bad. Mark didn't even turn his head. He took a long, slow drag, letting the smoke curl out of his nose like a dragon surveying its hoard. Relax, Maggie. It's raining outside. You want me to catch pneumonia? Besides, a little smoke keeps the moths away. Consider it home maintenance. He flicked the ash. He didn't use an ashtray. He flicked it directly into the potting soil of my mother's favorite peace lily. I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. Disrespecting a person is one thing. Disrespecting their sanctuary is another. But before I could speak, Mark turned his gaze on me. His eyes were glassy, slightly red from the bourbon. He patted the sofa adjacent to him. Sit down, Aubrey. Let's have a real talk. No military jargon. Just family. I sat on the edge of the sofa, keeping my posture rigid. What's on your mind, Mark? You, he said, pointing the lit end of the cigar at me. I've been watching you. You walk around here stiff as a board. You got no ring on your finger, no pictures of grandkids in your wallet. I did the math. You're 49, right? That's correct, I said. 49, he repeated, shaking his head with mock sadness. That's a dangerous age for a woman. You're approaching the event horizon, the point of no return. I knew where this was going. I had heard it from drunk sailors in port bars, and I had heard it from jealous male colleagues passed over for promotion. But hearing it here, in my childhood home, from a man wearing khaki shorts and drinking my dead father's liquor, felt particularly vile. My career has been my priority, I said calmly. I've served my country. Service is honorable, Mark nodded, feigning agreement. But let's look at the good book. You know your Bible, don't you? Ephesians 5:22. He didn't wait for me to answer. He recited it with the confidence of a TV evangelist. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife. He took a sip of bourbon, letting the words hang in the smoke-filled air. You see, Missy, nature has an order, a chain of command. God, man, woman. When you try to bypass that, when you try to be the man, well, you end up alone. You end up hard. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if he were giving me the secret to life. A woman without a husband and children. She's like a fruit tree that never blossoms. You can be a tall tree. You can be a strong tree. But if you don't bear fruit, you're just firewood. You're biologically useless. The insult hit me in the chest. It was a biological weapon, designed to target the one thing my rank couldn't protect. My choices as a woman. I have 5,000 sailors who look to me for guidance, I said, my voice icy. I have mentored hundreds of young officers. I have a legacy, Mark. Mark laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. Sailors, you think those kids care about you? They salute the uniform, Aubrey, not you. When you retire, when they strip those fancy stripes off your sleeve, who's gonna be there? The Navy doesn't love you back. He gestured around the empty room with his cigar. Picture it. 10 years from now, you're 60. You wake up in some cold apartment. Maybe you have a cat, maybe two. You look at those medals on the wall. Can those medals hug you? Can a Distinguished Service Medal hold your hand when you're sick? Can a ribbon tell you it loves you? He sat back, satisfied, thinking he had delivered a fatal blow. I'm telling you this because I'm an alpha male, he said, tapping his chest. I see the world how it is, not how you liberals want it to be. You chased a career to run away from your nature. And now? Now you're just a dried-up old maid playing dress-up in a man's world. I looked at my mother. She was standing by the bookshelf, clutching a dish towel. Her eyes were wet. Surely she would say something. Surely she would defend her daughter against this misogynistic assault. Mom? I said softly. Mom looked at Mark, then at me. She forced a smile that looked painful. He just wants you to be happy, Aubrey, she stammered, her voice cracking. Mark knows about these things. He's just worried you'll be lonely. Like I was. The air left my lungs. It wasn't the smoke, it was the betrayal. She didn't see me. She didn't see the Admiral. She didn't see the woman who had sacrificed everything to ensure she was safe financially. She only saw what Mark told her to see. A failure. A spinster. A disappointment. Mark smirked, seeing my mother's submission. He had won. He had successfully gaslighted her into believing his abuse was actually concern. He had weaponized her fear of loneliness to control her. I stood up. The smoke was burning my eyes, but I refused to blink. I refused to let a single tear fall in front of this man. I think I'll turn in, I said. My voice was devoid of emotion. Stoicism is not the absence of feeling, it is the mastery of it. Inside, I was a nuclear reactor on the verge of meltdown, but on the outside, I was cool steel. You do that, Mark chuckled, reaching for the remote control. Go get your beauty sleep. God knows you need it at your age. I walked up the stairs, my footsteps heavy. I could hear the TV volume go up again. I could hear Mark ask my mother to fetch him some ice. Before we continue to the next chapter, I need to ask you something. If you are listening to this and your blood is boiling right now, you are not alone. We have all met a Mark, someone who tries to make themselves feel big by making you feel small. I want you to pause for a second and hit the like button if you believe a woman's value is not defined by a ring on her finger. And tell me in the comments, if you were Aubrey, would you have slapped him, or would you have stayed silent like she did? Type, "Silence is power," if you think she's doing the right thing by waiting. I closed the door to my childhood bedroom and leaned against it, breathing hard. The insults replayed in my head. Barren, firewood, useless. He thought he had broken me. He thought I was retreating to lick my wounds. But as I looked around the room, my eyes landed on my open bag. I saw the corner of a bank statement sticking out of a folder I had brought with me. Mark had made a mistake. He had gotten comfortable. He thought he was untouchable because he was a man in a house of women. But he forgot one thing. I wasn't just a woman. I was an investigator. If he was this insecure about his status, this desperate to prove he was a big shot, then he was hiding something. Men like Mark don't just steal dignity, they steal money. I looked at the clock, 9 p.m. I would wake up at 0500. While he was sleeping off his bourbon, I was going to find out exactly who Mark Hensley really was. The biological warfare was over. The financial audit was about to begin. The internal clock of a naval officer is a stubborn thing. It doesn't care about jet lag, and it certainly doesn't care about emotional exhaustion. At 0500 hours, my eyes snapped open. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain that hadn't let up since I arrived. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the familiar popcorn ceiling of my childhood bedroom. For a split second, I felt safe. Then, the memory of the night before, the cigar smoke, the insults, the way my mother shrank into herself, came flooding back. I wasn't going back to sleep. I needed coffee, black and strong. I slipped out of bed, dressed in my gray Navy PT gear, physical training shorts, and a t-shirt, and moved silently down the hallway. I didn't turn on the lights. I knew every squeaky floorboard in this house. I had spent 18 years learning how to avoid them when sneaking out as a teenager. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw a light coming from the kitchen. I paused. My mother wasn't an early riser anymore. Since Dad passed, she usually slept until 7. I moved closer to the kitchen doorway, staying in the shadows. There, sitting at the small breakfast table, was Mark. He wasn't watching TV. He wasn't drinking. He was hunched over a stack of papers, a pair of reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, a calculator in his hand. He looked like a general studying a battlefield map. But as I leaned in, I recognized the logo on the papers. It was the blue and red branding of my mother's bank. I stepped into the light. Little early for accounting, isn't it, Mark? He jumped. He actually jumped. His hand instinctively slapped down over the paper he was reading, covering it. He whipped his head around, his eyes wide before he composed himself into that familiar, arrogant smirk. Jesus, Missy, he breathed, taking off his glasses. You sneak around like a cat. Don't they teach you to announce yourself in the Navy? They teach us stealth, I said, walking over to the coffee maker. I kept my back to him, listening to the rustle of papers as he quickly shuffled them into a folder. What are you working on? Just household management, he said, his voice regaining its bluster. This house is falling apart, Aubrey. The wiring is shot. The insulation is garbage. I was just running the numbers to see what it would take to bring it up to code. You know, modern standards. Open concept, granite countertops, maybe knock down that wall between the dining room and the den. I turned around, leaning against the counter with my mug. That sounds expensive. Does Mom want an open concept? Mark waved a hand dismissively. Maggie doesn't know what she wants. She's stuck in the 70s. I'm trying to increase the property value for her. It's an investment. You have to spend money to make money, right? He stood up, clutching the folder to his chest. I'm gonna go check the truck. Make sure the windows are rolled up tight with this rain. He brushed past me, smelling of stale morning breath and Old Spice. He was in a hurry to get away from my questions. I waited until I heard the front door close. Then, I moved. I didn't go after him. I went to the trash can. Mark was sloppy. Arrogant people usually are. Lying right on top of yesterday's coffee grounds was a crumpled piece of paper. I fished it out and smoothed it flat on the counter. It was a receipt from the local auto dealership. A payment receipt. 2024 Ford F-150 Platinum. Monthly payment, $845. That was a mortgage payment. That was an insane amount of money for a retired man living in his girlfriend's house. But what froze my blood wasn't the amount. It was the name on the billing address, Margaret Miller. My mother was paying for his truck. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach, replacing the need for caffeine. I folded the receipt and put it in my pocket. An hour later, Mark was snoring on the couch again. His morning check had evidently exhausted him. I found Mom in the sunroom, watering her plants. She looked tired, the dark circles under her eyes prominent in the natural light. "Morning, Mom," I said gently. "Oh, hi, honey," she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "There's coffee." "I had some," I said. I decided to bypass the small talk. I pulled the crumpled receipt from my pocket and placed it on the potting bench next to her orchids. "Mom, why is your name on Mark's truck note?" She froze, her watering can hovering in midair. She didn't look at me. She looked at the receipt, her face flushing pink. It's complicated, Aubrey," she stammered. "Mark needed a reliable vehicle. His old car died, and a man of his stature needs a truck." "Why are you paying for it?" I pressed, keeping my voice low but firm. "I'm not paying for it forever," she insisted, finally looking at me, defensive. "I just co-signed, and I'm covering the payments temporarily, just until his pension gets sorted out." "His pension?" I asked. The investigator in me went on high alert. "He's a retired 06, Mom. A colonel with 25 years of service. His pension is automatic, it's direct deposit, it doesn't get unsorted." "Well, that's what he told me," Mom said, wringing her hands. "He said there was a glitch with DFAS. The Defense Finance and Accounting Service. He said because of his divorce from his ex-wife, that horrible woman who took everything, there was a freeze on his accounts. He's waiting for the paperwork to clear. It's been a nightmare for him, Aubrey. He's so embarrassed about it." "How long has it been frozen, Mom?" She looked down at her slippers. "About 4 months." 4 months, I repeated. "So for 4 months, you've been paying for his truck, his food, his booze, and his cigars? On your fixed income? On Dad's life insurance money?" "He's going to pay me back," she snapped, tears welling up in her eyes. "With interest, he promised. He's writing up a plan to renovate the house to pay me back for the hospitality. He wants to knock down walls." "He wants to knock down walls with your money, Mom," I said ruthlessly. "He has no money. If DFAS froze a colonel's pay for 4 months, he'd be on the phone with his congressman every single day. Is he making those calls? Or is he watching football?" Mom didn't answer. She turned away, trembling. "You don't understand. He loves me. We're partners." "Partners share burdens, Mom. Parasites feed off the host." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "Don't call him that." "I'm sorry," I said, stepping back, "but I'm going to prove it to you." I walked away, my heart pounding. It was worse than I thought. Mark wasn't just a misogynist bully. He was a financial predator. He had targeted a lonely widow, used a fake sob story about a crazy ex-wife, and bureaucratic glitches. Stories that sounded plausible to a civilian but were laughable to anyone in the service, to drain her life savings. He was driving a luxury truck on her dime while she clipped coupons for groceries. I went back to the kitchen and looked at the spot where he had been sitting. He had been calculating the renovation costs, not to increase the property value for her, but to convince her to pull more money out of her retirement accounts, a home improvement loan that he would undoubtedly manage and from which he would undoubtedly skim. I needed to stop him. But I couldn't just yell. Mom was too deep in the fog. She was defending him because admitting the truth would mean admitting she had been fooled. It would mean she was alone again. I needed leverage. I needed something that would shatter his colonel persona so thoroughly that even my mother couldn't ignore it. I looked at the bag I had left at the bottom of the stairs, the bag with my uniform. Mark wanted order and discipline. He wanted to talk about chain of command. Fine, I would give him exactly what he asked for. By late afternoon, the rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a thick, suffocating humidity that makes Virginia Beach feel like a sauna in September. I had spent the last 2 hours fixing the screen door on the back porch, something my father would have done immediately. But Mark had let hang off its hinges for months. I came inside, wiping the grease from my hands onto a rag. I had left my leather overnight bag, the one I lived out of, neatly tucked against the wall at the bottom of the staircase. It was positioned perfectly on the landing, out of the flow of traffic. In the Navy, gear adrift is a gift, meaning if you leave your stuff lying around, it's gone. I didn't leave gear adrift. I was precise. I was heading to the kitchen to wash up when I heard the heavy, lumbering footsteps of Mark coming down the stairs. Thump, thump, thump. Then, silence. He had stopped at the landing. I turned around just in time to see it. Mark looked at my bag. There was plenty of room, at least 3 feet, to walk past it. But he didn't walk past it. He looked at the bag, looked at the kitchen door where he thought I was, and then, with the deliberation of a soccer player taking a penalty kick, he swung his foot. Thud. He kicked the heavy leather bag hard enough to send it skidding across the hardwood floor. Ow! Damn it! Son of a bitch! Mark grabbed his shin, hopping on one leg, putting on a performance that would have embarrassed a B-list actor. He leaned against the banister, groaning loudly. Maggie, Maggie, get in here. I stood there, my arms crossed, watching the show. My mother came running from the laundry room, her face pale with panic. What happened? Mark, are you okay? I'm crippled, that's what I am, Mark bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at me. Your daughter tried to kill me. Look at this. She left her bag right in the middle of the walkway. It's a trip hazard, a lawsuit waiting to happen. He turned his fury on me. His face was red, his neck veins bulging. This wasn't just about a stubbed toe. This was about power. He needed to break me. Get over here, he barked. I walked slowly to the foot of the stairs. I didn't rush. I didn't look scared. I looked at him with the cold calculation of an officer assessing a threat. The bag was against the wall, Mark, I said calmly. You had 3 feet of clearance. Don't you backtalk me, Missy, he shouted, spit flying from his lips. I don't care where you think it was. In my house, we keep the decks clear. Is this how you live in the Navy? Is this what they teach you? To be a slob? He limped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of stale beer and aggression. In the Air Force, he lectured, poking a finger toward my chest. We had discipline. We had order. If a cadet left his gear in the walkway, we threw it out the window. We taught them respect. Obviously, you never learned that. That's probably why you're stuck at the bottom of the ladder, huh? Just a grunt who can't even keep her quarters clean. I felt the heat rising in my chest. The bottom of the ladder. I commanded a carrier strike group. I was responsible for the order and discipline of a floating city. My quarters on the ship were inspected by legitimate admirals. And here was a man who couldn't even fix a screen door, lecturing me on standards. Mark, I began, my voice dropping an octave, a warning tone that usually made commanders nervous. I assure you, my discipline is not the issue here. Don't you dare give me attitude, he screamed. Apologize, right now. You apologize for your negligence. I looked at my mother. I expected her to say, Mark, stop it, she didn't do anything. I expected her to be the mother who used to chase bullies away from the playground. But she didn't. She stood next to him, wringing her hands, tears welling up in her eyes. She looked terrified. Not of him hurting her physically, but of the noise, the conflict, the potential abandonment. Aubrey, please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Just tell him you're sorry. Please, for me. That was the knife twist. For me. She was asking me to validate his lie to keep her peace. She was asking me to submit to a tyrant so she wouldn't have to face the truth. I looked at Mark. He was grinning now, a triumphant, predatory grin. He knew he had her, and because he had her, he thought he had me. I took a deep breath. I could end this right now. I could open that bag, pull out my ID, and end his entire charade. But the timing wasn't right. It was 4 p.m. He was just buzzed, not drunk. The impact wouldn't be maximum. I needed total devastation. I swallowed my pride. It tasted like bile. I apologize, Mark, I said, my voice flat. I should have been more careful with the placement of my gear. It won't happen again. Mark let out a huff of satisfaction. He straightened up, his injured leg miraculously healed. See? Was that so hard? He sneered. A little humility goes a long way, kiddo. Maybe if you learned to say sorry more often, you'd have a husband by now. He turned to my mother. Maggie, get me an ice pack and a beer. I need to elevate this leg. He hobbled toward the living room, effectively dismissing me. I stood alone in the hallway. My mother hurried past me to the kitchen, avoiding my gaze. I'm sorry, honey, she whispered as she passed. He's just particular. I didn't answer. I walked over to my bag. It was scuffed from his kick. I bent down and picked it up. It was heavy. Not just with clothes, but with the weight of what was inside. Inside the side pocket, wrapped in a velvet cloth, was my shoulder board case. Inside that case were 2 silver stars. Mark wanted to talk about discipline. He wanted to talk about order. He wanted to talk about the chain of command. He had just lectured a rear admiral on how to be a soldier. He had just kicked the bag containing the uniform of a flag officer. I tightened my grip on the leather handle. The leather creaked. You're right about discipline, Mark, I whispered to the empty hallway, my eyes fixed on the back of his head as he settled into the recliner. But you are very, very wrong about who was about to apply it. I carried the bag up the stairs. My steps were silent now. I wasn't just walking to my room. I was walking to my command post. I checked my watch. 1700 hours. I would let him have his dinner. I would let him have his drinks. I would let him get comfortable in his false sense of superiority. But tonight, at 2200 hours, the hierarchy of this house was going to change. Permanently. I entered my room and locked the door. I placed the bag on the bed and unzipped it. The silver stars caught the last light of the afternoon sun. They looked sharp. They looked cold. They looked ready. 2200 hours. In the military, time is precise. It isn't 10 o'clock at night. It is 2200. It marks the shift of the watch, the securing of the perimeter. For most of my life, this hour meant I was on the bridge of a ship, looking out over a black ocean, responsible for the lives of thousands. Tonight, my command post was the kitchen island of my mother's house. The house was quiet. The rain had finally tapped out, leaving a heavy, humid silence in its wake. I sat on a bar stool, my laptop open, the blue light illuminating my face. Next to my computer sat a small rectangular leather box. It was unobtrusive, just a simple black box that traveled with me everywhere. I was reviewing a readiness report from the Pacific Fleet, my mind miles away from the petty insults of the dinner table. I was calm. I was focused. Then, the kitchen lights went out. 1 second, I was reading about supply chain logistics. The next, I was plunged into darkness. Curfew, Missy. The voice came from the doorway. Mark! He flicked the hallway light on, casting a long, distorted shadow across the kitchen floor. He stood there, swaying slightly, a fresh glass of bourbon in his hand. He had changed out of his khaki shorts into a pair of sweatpants, but he still wore that oversized military watch, checking it theatrically. In this house, Mark slurred, walking toward me. We run a tight ship. 2200 is lights out, taps. Time for little girls to go to sleep. I didn't close my laptop. I didn't flinch. I slowly turned on the stool to face him. I'm working, Mark, I said, my voice low and even. I suggest you go to bed. Mark laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. The smell of cheap bourbon and stale cigar smoke was overpowering. You suggest? He sneered, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. You don't get to suggest anything. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I was? A colonel, I said. 06. That's right, he bellowed, slamming his hand down on the granite counter, making my coffee cup jump. A full-bird colonel. Do you know how many men I commanded? Do you know the respect I get when I walk onto a base? I am the ranking officer in this house. That means I give the orders and you follow them. He poked a finger toward my face. You might play little soldier games in the Navy, pushing papers for some captain. But here, I am the alpha. I am the commander. and I am ordering you to close that computer and get upstairs before I throw it out the back door." I looked at his finger. Then I looked at his eyes. They were bloodshot, filled with a mixture of alcohol and fragile male ego. He truly believed it. He believed that his rank, retired or not, gave him divine right over me. He believed I was a nobody. Margaret Thatcher once said, "Being powerful is like being a lady. If you have to tell people you are, you aren't." Mark had spent 2 days telling me how powerful he was. I took a deep breath. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. The time for observation was over. The time for engagement had arrived. "Actually, Mark," I said, my voice dropping to a register that was devoid of emotion, "you are operating under a false assumption." "Excuse me?" he spat. "You assume you are the ranking officer present," I continued, reaching out my hand toward the small black leather box on the counter. "But you failed to verify your intelligence." Mark frowned, confused. "What are you babbling about?" I didn't answer. I simply unsnapped the brass latch of the case. It made a sharp click that echoed in the silent kitchen. With a slow, deliberate movement, I flipped the lid open. The hallway light caught the contents instantly. Resting on the deep blue velvet lining were not the gold oak leaves of a major, nor the silver eagle of a colonel. There, shining with a cold, terrifying brilliance, were 2 silver stars. Rear Admiral, upper half, 08. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Mark looked at the box. He blinked. He leaned in, squinting, as if his brain refused to process the visual data. He looked at the stars, then at me, then back at the stars. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a shade was being pulled down. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The glass of bourbon in his hand tilted dangerously. I stood up. I didn't just stand. I rose. I drew myself up to my full height, my shoulders back, my chin high. I wasn't wearing a uniform, just a t-shirt and sweatpants, but in that moment, I was wearing the authority of the United States Navy. "Colonel Hensley," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a crashing wave. It was the command voice, a tone honed on the bridges of warships, designed to cut through storms and chaos. "You are currently addressing a rear admiral." I saw the reaction before he could stop it. It was muscle memory. It was 25 years of conditioning drilled into his nervous system. Mark's spine snapped straight. His heels clicked together. His chin tucked in. His arm twitched halfway to a salute before he froze, caught in a paralyzed limbo between terror and disbelief. He stood at the position of attention, in his own kitchen, in his sweatpants. I, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a joke, looking for anything to save him. But there was nothing. Just the stars. "You spoke to me about discipline," I said, stepping around the island, walking toward him. He didn't move. He couldn't. "You spoke to me about the chain of command. Do you understand the chain of command, Colonel?" Yes, ma'am," he whispered. The ma'am slipped out involuntarily. "Good," I said, stopping right in front of him. I was close enough to see the sweat beading on his upper lip. "Then you know that a colonel does not order an admiral to go to bed. A colonel does not kick an admiral's gear. And a colonel certainly does not disrespect an admiral's mother in her own home." Mark was trembling. The bully, the alpha male, the loudmouth. He was gone. In his place was a terrified junior officer who had just realized he had made a career-ending mistake. "I didn't know," he choked out. "Aubry? Admiral." "I didn't know." "That," I said coldly, "is because you never asked. You were too busy listening to your own voice." I reached over and plucked the bourbon glass from his shaking hand before he dropped it. I set it on the counter with a soft thud. "Now," I said, my eyes boring into his. "Stand down, Colonel. Dismissed." Mark stumbled back as if I had pushed him. He looked at me one last time, horror written all over his face, and then he turned and fled. He didn't walk. He scurried toward the guest room, his tail firmly between his legs. I stood alone in the kitchen, the adrenaline humming in my veins. I looked down at the two silver stars in the box. They hadn't changed. They were just metal. But tonight, they were the sword of justice. I have to stop here for a second because I still get goosebumps remembering the look on his face. That moment, when the bully realizes he picked a fight with the wrong person, is the sweetest feeling in the world. If you cheered when Mark snapped to attention, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. And I want to see the comments section explode. If you are Team Aubrey, if you believe in silent power, just comment one word. Salute. Let's see how many salutes we can get for taking the trash out. I closed the velvet box with a satisfying snap. The battle of the kitchen was over. But the war for my mother's future was just beginning. And now that Mark knew exactly who he was dealing with, things were about to get very interesting. The kitchen was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. Mark was leaning against the granite counter, his face pale, his breath coming in shallow, panicked rasps. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, or in this case, a career-ending court-martial. But as the initial shock of the silver stars faded, a different kind of panic set in. I saw his eyes dart toward the hallway. He wasn't looking for an escape route anymore. He was looking for his leverage. He was looking for his bankroll. "Maggie!" he called out, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat and tried to summon his fake baritone. "Maggie, honey, come in here." He was trying to get ahead of the narrative. It's a classic manipulator tactic. Isolate the victim, spin the story, and paint the truth-teller as the villain. But he was too late. From the shadows of the hallway, a figure emerged. My mother hadn't been asleep. She hadn't been cowering in her room. She had been standing just outside the door frame, in the dark, listening to every single word. She walked into the harsh light of the kitchen. She wasn't wearing her apron. She was wearing her old flannel robe, the one she used to wear when she sat up waiting for me to come home from high school dates. Her hair was down, gray and silver strands framing a face that looked tired, yes, but for the first time in days, completely awake. Mark scrambled toward her, his hands outstretched. "Babe, you won't believe this. Your daughter, she trapped me. She set me up. She's waving her rank around, trying to humiliate me in my own home. It's disrespectful, Maggie. It's conduct unbecoming." He was pleading now, desperation leaking from every pore. He reached for her hand, trying to reestablish physical dominance, trying to anchor himself back into the role of the protector. Mom took a step back. She pulled her hand away as if his skin were made of burning coal. "In your home, Mark?" she asked softly. Mark froze. "Well, our home. You know what I mean. We're a team. I'm just saying, she ambushed me." I stayed quiet. I closed the velvet box with a soft snap and leaned back against the counter. I didn't need to say anything. The evidence was in the room. "She didn't ambush you, Mark," Mom said, her voice gaining a steadiness I hadn't heard in years. "She just showed you who she really is. And because of that, you showed me who you really are." "I was just following protocol," Mark stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's an admiral, Maggie. You don't understand the military code. When a superior officer is present, you show respect. That's all I was doing, showing respect." I couldn't help it. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Mom," I said gently, ignoring him. "Look at him, really look at him. He snapped to attention because he respects the medal on my shoulder. But when I walked through that door yesterday as just your daughter, as a woman in a raincoat, he wouldn't even stand up to shake my hand." I walked over to my mother and placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch. She leaned into me. "He doesn't respect women, Mom," I whispered. "He respects power. And he only liked you because he thought you didn't have any." Mark's face turned a mottled purple. "That is a lie. I love this woman. I have done everything for her. I'm fixing up this house. I'm managing the finances because she was drowning. I am the only thing standing between her and a lonely old age." He played his ace card, the fear of loneliness, the weapon he had used to bludgeon her into submission for months. For a second, the room held its breath. I felt Mom tense up under my hand. I knew that fear. It was the terror of silence, of empty rooms, of having no one to cook for. It was a powerful ghost. Mom looked at Mark. She looked at the man sweating in his sweatpants, the man who had kicked my bag, the man who had insulted her cooking, the man who was driving a truck she paid for. Then she looked at me. She looked at the daughter she had raised alone. She saw the strength in my posture, the same strength she used to have before he chipped it away. I would rather be lonely, Mom said, her voice clear as a bell, than be with a man who makes me feel small. Mark's jaw dropped. Maggie, you're not thinking straight. It's late. You're emotional. I am emotional, she agreed, nodding slowly. I'm angry. I'm angry that I let you sit in my husband's chair. I'm angry that I let you smoke in my living room. But mostly, I'm angry that I let you make me believe I wasn't enough. She pointed to the hallway. To the front door. Pack your bags, Mark. Mark blinked, letting out a nervous chuckle. What? Babe, come on, it's 10:30 at night. Where am I gonna go? I don't care, Mom said. Go to a hotel. Go to your ex-wife's. Go to the base you brag about so much. But you are not sleeping under my roof tonight. You can't do this, Mark snarled, his mask slipping completely now, revealing the nasty entitlement underneath. I have rights. I've been living here for 4 months. You can't just kick me out like a dog. Actually, I interjected, stepping forward. Since you never signed a lease and you don't pay rent, you are technically a guest. And as of this moment, your invitation has been revoked. Now, you can leave voluntarily, or I can call the base commander at Naval Station Norfolk. I'm sure he'd love to hear a story about a retired Air Force colonel refusing to vacate a widow's home. Mark looked at me, then at Mom. He saw the wall of resolve. He saw the checkmate. Fine, he spat, turning on his heel. Fine, you want to be alone? Rot in this dump. You think she's gonna stay? He gestured at me. She's gonna leave you, Maggie. She's gonna go back to her ships and her career, and you're gonna be all alone in this big, empty house. And you'll cry for me. I might cry, Mom said, holding her head high. But they will be my tears, not yours. Mark stormed past us. We heard him stomping up the stairs. We heard the violent sounds of drawers being ripped open, of things being thrown into a suitcase. He was making as much noise as possible, a final tantrum to punish us. 10 minutes later, he came back down, dragging a rolling suitcase and carrying a duffel bag. He didn't look at us. He stormed to the front door, yanked it open, and marched out into the night. Slam. The door shook in its frame. The sound echoed through the house, final and absolute. Then came the roar of the Ford F-150 starting up, the truck my mother was paying for, and tires screeching as he peeled out of the driveway. And then, silence. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the last 2 days. It was the clean, quiet silence of a storm that has passed. I looked at Mom. She was trembling now, the adrenaline fading. Her shoulders shook, and a sob escaped her throat. Oh, God, she whispered, covering her face with her hands. I was so stupid. Aubrey, I was so stupid. No, Mom, I said, pulling her into a tight embrace. I held her the way she used to hold me when I scraped my knees. You weren't stupid, you were hopeful. There's a difference. She cried into my shoulder, releasing months of tension, months of walking on eggshells. I stroked her gray hair, feeling the fierce protectiveness of a daughter who has finally repaid her debt. He's gone, I whispered. He's really gone. The house feels so big, she sniffled, pulling back and wiping her eyes with her sleeve. It's not big, Mom, I smiled, grabbing a tissue from the counter and handing it to her. It's just empty of trash. Now we have room to bring the good stuff back in. She managed a weak, watery smile. Can we throw away the rest of that bourbon? Way ahead of you, I said, picking up the bottle Mark had left on the counter. We walked to the sink together. I poured the amber liquid down the drain, watching it swirl away. It smelled like him, and then it was gone, washed away. But as I watched my mother dry her eyes, I knew this wasn't completely over. Mark was a narcissist, and narcissists don't just walk away when they've been humiliated, they strike back. I had won the battle of the house, but I had a feeling Mark wasn't done trying to scorch the earth. Come on, I said, putting an arm around her. Let's lock the deadbolt, double-check it, then I'm making us some tea. Aubrey? Yeah, Mom. Thank you, she whispered, for bringing the stars home. Anytime, Mom. Anytime. For 3 days, the house in Virginia Beach had been peaceful. We had changed the locks within an hour of Mark's departure. We had aired out the living room, scrubbing the smell of stale smoke from the curtains. My mother was humming again. It was a fragile tune, shaky and quiet, but it was there. She felt strong enough to return to her volunteer shift at the VA Medical Center in Hampton. It was her sanctuary, a place where she felt useful, reading to veterans and organizing the donation drive. I offered to drive her, but she insisted on taking her car. I need to do this, Aubrey, she said. I need to get back on the horse. I stayed home to handle the fallout, contacting the bank, checking credit reports, the unglamorous forensic work of cleaning up a financial mess. At 11 a.m., my phone rang. It wasn't Mom. It was Mrs. Gable, the head volunteer coordinator at the VA. Aubrey? Her voice was tight, hushed, like she was hiding under a desk. You need to get down here. It's him. The man your mother was seeing. He's in the main lobby and he's making a scene. My blood ran cold, then immediately hot. Is my mother safe? I asked, grabbing my keys and heading for the door. She's in the staff break room. Security is trying to talk to him, but he's wearing his uniform, Aubrey. He's wearing his service dress blues. He's waving his retiree ID around and demanding to see his wife. He's telling everyone who will listen that you've kidnapped her mentally. I stopped in the driveway. He was wearing his uniform. Mark wasn't just a jilted ex-boyfriend causing a domestic disturbance anymore. He was a retired commissioned officer using the uniform of the United States Air Force to intimidate civilians and harass a volunteer in a federal facility. He had just crossed a line from pathetic to punishable. I'm on my way, I said. Do not let him near her. I got into my car, but I didn't speed. Speeding is for amateurs who are reacting to chaos. I was about to control the chaos. I pulled my phone out and scrolled through my contacts. I didn't dial 911. Local cops would treat this as a domestic dispute. They would ask him to leave, give him a warning, and let him drive away. Mark needed more than a warning. He needed a court-martial of public opinion. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. Langley Air Force Base, Office of the Base Commander. This is Rear Admiral Aubrey Miller, USN, I said, my voice cutting through the static. Connect me to Brigadier General Vance, Priority 1. 30 seconds later, a deep, familiar voice came on the line. Aubrey, I haven't heard from you since the Joint Chiefs Summit. Everything okay? Hello, Tom, I said, merging onto the highway. I have a situation at the Hampton VA Medical Center. I have a retired 06, Colonel Mark Hensley, causing a disturbance in full uniform. He is harassing volunteers and leveraging his rank to bypass hospital security. It is conduct unbecoming, Tom. And it is reflecting very poorly on your branch. There was a pause. The kind of pause where you can hear a general's jaw clench. He's in uniform? General Vance asked. Full service dress, making a spectacle in front of veterans. I'll handle it, Vance said. His tone was no longer friendly. It was lethal. I'll have a unit from the 603rd Security Forces Squadron there in 10 minutes. They have jurisdiction. Thank you, General. I hung up. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to aim the weapon. When I walked into the VA Medical Center 15 minutes later, the lobby was a theater of the absurd. Mark was standing near the information desk. He looked ridiculous. His uniform jacket was too tight, straining at the buttons over his gut. He was red-faced, sweating, and holding a bouquet of cheap supermarket roses that were wilting in the heat. A small crowd of veterans, men in wheelchairs, women with canes, people who had actually given their bodies for this country, were watching him with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. I have a right to see her, Mark was shouting at a poor VA security guard. She is confused. Her daughter is a high-ranking official who is brainwashing her. This is elder abuse. I am a colonel. Do you see this eagle? I demand you let me pass. Sir, please lower your voice, the guard said, looking overwhelmed. Don't tell me what to do, son, Mark bellowed. I was flying sorties while you were in diapers. Maggie, come out here. Save yourself. I stood by the entrance, folding my arms. I didn't intervene. I wanted him to dig the hole deep. I wanted every witness to see exactly who he was. Then, the automatic doors behind me slid open. 4 uniformed Air Force Security Forces personnel, military police, marched in. They weren't the rent-a-cops Mark was used to bullying. These were active-duty airmen, crisp, professional, and imposing. Leading them was a master sergeant who looked like he chewed granite for breakfast. The lobby went silent. Mark turned around, a smug smile forming on his face. He thought they were his reinforcements. He thought General Vance had sent an honor guard for him. "Finally!" Mark shouted, spreading his arms. "Some respect. Sergeant, arrest the security guard for obstruction of justice. I am Colonel Hensley, and I have a situation here." The master sergeant walked right up to Mark. He didn't salute. "Colonel Mark Hensley?" the sergeant asked, his voice flat. "Yes, that's me." Mark beamed, adjusting his tie. "Sir, I am detaining you for disorderly conduct on federal property and conduct unbecoming an officer," the sergeant said. "You are creating a disturbance and bringing discredit upon the uniform. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Mark's smile vanished. "Excuse me, do you know who I am? I am an O6. You are an E7. Stand at attention when you speak to me." "Sir," the sergeant stepped closer, his hand resting on his belt. "You are retired, and right now, you are acting like a belligerent civilian. Turn around, now." Mark looked at the MPs. Then he looked at the crowd. The veterans were whispering, some were snickering. The respect he craved was gone, replaced by the one thing he feared most: ridicule. He spotted me standing by the door. His eyes bulged. "You!" he screamed, pointing a shaking finger. "You did this! You traitor! You called the dogs on a brother in arms." "You are no brother of mine, Mark," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet lobby. "You lost that privilege when you used that uniform to terrorize a woman." The MPs moved in. They were gentle but firm. They spun Mark around. He didn't fight. Cowards never do when the odds are even. I watched as they escorted him out, the plastic roses falling to the floor, crushed under the boots of the police. "This is a mistake," Mark was babbling as they dragged him through the sliding doors. "I know people. I know the general." "Tell it to the judge advocate, sir," the sergeant said as the doors slid shut. The lobby exhaled. I walked over to the break room door. It opened, and my mother stepped out. She was shaking, but she was dry-eyed. She had watched the whole thing through the glass window. "Is he gone?" she asked. "He's gone, Mom," I said. "And he's not coming back. Not unless he wants to lose his pension." She looked at the crushed roses on the floor. Then she looked at the veterans in the lobby, who were nodding at us respectfully. "He looked so small," Mom whispered, "in that uniform. He just looked so small." "Bullies always do," I said, "when you finally turn on the lights." I put my arm around her and guided her toward the exit. We walked past the spot where Mark had made his last stand. No one stopped us. No one questioned us. Outside, the sun was shining. The security forces cruiser was pulling away, red and blue lights flashing silently. "Come on, Mom," I said, opening her car door. "Let's go get some lunch. I know a place that puts actual salt in their casserole." She laughed. It was a short, surprised sound, but it was real. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." The war was over. The cleanup was done. Now, finally, we could start to rebuild. The sound of a drill biting into wood is usually annoying. Today, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. I stood in the foyer, watching the locksmith, a burly guy named Mike with a "Support Our Troops" patch on his hat, tightened the final screw on the new deadbolt. He tested the key. Click, thunk, solid steel sliding into place. "You're all set, Admiral," Mike said, handing me a set of shiny brass keys. "This is a grade 1 lock. Nobody's getting in here unless they bring a battering ram." "Thank you, Mike," I said, handing him a check. I locked the door behind him. Then I unlocked it. Then I locked it again. It was a small ritual, but it felt necessary. The physical barrier was up. Now came the harder part, the administrative firewall. I found Mom at the kitchen table. She was surrounded by a sea of paperwork, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. The air smelled of strong coffee and anxiety. Okay, I said, pulling up a chair and opening my laptop. Let's look at the damage. We spent the next 3 hours on the phone. It was the unglamorous trench warfare of modern life, fighting with bureaucracy. We called the 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, and froze her credit. We called the bank and closed the joint account Mark had pressured her into opening. The news wasn't good, but it wasn't fatal. The truck was a lease, I said, putting the phone down after a long conversation with the Ford dealership. Since you co-signed, we're on the hook for the early termination fee. It's about $3,000. Mom flinched. $3,000, that's my entire vacation fund. It's money, Mom, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Money can be replaced. Your dignity, that's expensive. Consider the $3,000 tuition fee. You paid for a very expensive lesson. She sighed, taking off her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. I just feel so foolish. I let him take over everything, even the house. She looked up, her eyes drifting toward the living room. I followed her gaze. When Mark moved in, he had insisted on repainting the living room. He called the color Slate Command. I called it Prison Block Gray. It was a cold, industrial color that sucked the light out of the room and made the antique furniture look depressing. I hate that wall, Mom whispered. It feels like a cloudy day that never ends. I looked at the wall. Then I looked at my watch. 1,300 hours. Get your purse, I said, standing up. Mom looked confused. Why? Where are we going? We're going to Home Depot, I said. And we're buying the brightest, happiest blue paint we can find. That gray wall dies today. An hour later, we were back. We looked like a hazardous materials team. We had laid down canvas drop cloths, taped up the trim with blue masking tape, and pried open 2 gallons of Sherwin-Williams Coastal Bliss. There is something profoundly therapeutic about manual labor. For years, my work had been intellectual, strategy, logistics, personnel management, but dipping a roller into a tray of thick, rich paint and rolling it over a scarred wall? That was visceral. We put on Mom's favorite Motown playlist. The Temptations were singing My Girl as we attacked the wall. Slap, roll, slap, roll. With every stroke, the cold masculine gray disappeared, replaced by the color of a Caribbean shallow. The room began to breathe again. The light from the bay window hit the wet paint and bounced around, filling the space with energy. Mom wasn't just painting, she was exercising a ghost. She was aggressive with the roller, humming loudly, covering up every last trace of Mark's influence. We got paint in our hair. I got a smudge of blue on my nose. We didn't care. By 6 p.m., the room was transformed. It smelled of fresh latex and clean beginnings. We were exhausted. We collapsed onto the drop cloth in the middle of the room, leaning back against the sofa. I ordered a large pepperoni pizza from the local place, the greasy comfort food kind that we rarely ate. When the box arrived, we ate right there on the floor, passing napkins back and forth, admiring our handiwork in the fading daylight. It looks like the ocean, Mom said softly, chewing on a crust. It looks like it used to before. Before. It looks better, I corrected her, because we did it. Silence settled between us. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was the comfortable silence of 2 soldiers who had survived a firefight. Avery? Mom asked, not looking at me. She was tracing the pattern of paint splatters on the canvas. Yeah, Mom. Why do you do it? Do what? Paint? No, she shook her head. Why do you come back? You're a rear admiral. You have a staff. You have a career that takes you around the world. You're important. And I'm just an old woman who got tricked by a con artist in a Ford truck. She looked at me then, her eyes vulnerable. I'm weak, Aubrey. I let him walk all over me. Why do you still need me? I put my slice of pizza down. I wiped my hands on a paper towel, thinking about how to answer. I thought about the bridge of my ship, the cold wind, the immense weight of responsibility, the way 5,000 people looked at me for answers, expecting me to be made of steel. They didn't know that sometimes the steel felt like it was cracking. "Mom," I said quietly, "do you know what it's like to be the boss? To be the one who can never be wrong, who can never be scared?" She shook her head. "It's lonely," I admitted. The word hung in the air, heavy and true. "It is incredibly lonely. Everyone salutes me. Everyone says yes, ma'am. But nobody asks me if I'm okay. Nobody makes me chicken casserole when I'm tired." I turned to her, pulling my knees up to my chest. "You think you're weak because you trusted someone. I don't see weakness. I see a woman who still has a heart soft enough to trust, even after everything. I've lost that, Mom. The Navy took that from me a long time ago. I have armor. You have heart." Tears pricked my eyes. "I come back because when I walk through that door, I don't have to be the Admiral. I don't have to be the 07. I can just be Aubrey. I can just be your daughter. And frankly, I need that more than I need the stars on my collar." Mom stared at me. She reached out with her paint-stained hand and touched my cheek. Her palm was warm. "You're always my Aubrey," she whispered, "even with the stars." "And you're always my mom," I said, leaning into her touch, "even with the gray walls, which for the record, are gone." We both laughed. It was a genuine sound, bubbling up from the chest. "Promise me something," Mom said, her voice serious again. "Anything. Promise me you won't let the job make you hard forever. Promise me you'll find someone who sees you, not the uniform." "I'm working on it," I smiled. "But right now, I'm pretty happy just hanging out with my favorite roommate." "Well," Mom said, grabbing another slice of pizza, "this roommate expects you to help clean up these brushes. That's the rule." "Yes, ma'am," I saluted playfully. We finished the pizza as the sun went down, bathing the new blue room in a soft twilight glow. The house felt secure. The locks were changed. The money was safe. But more importantly, the connection between us had been restored. We had stripped away the layers of old paint, the layers of lies, and the layers of distance. What was left was the foundation. And looking at my mother, laughing with a smear of blue paint on her cheek, I knew that foundation was strong enough to weather any storm. Even a hurricane named Mark. The Pacific Ocean is different from the Atlantic. It's bluer, deeper, and feels endless. Standing on the vulture's row of the aircraft carrier, looking down at the flight deck, the world is nothing but wind, jet fuel, and the deafening roar of freedom. It had been 6 months since I stood in my mother's kitchen in Virginia Beach. 6 months since I put 2 silver stars on a velvet cushion and watched a bully shrink into a coward. Down below, an FA-18 Super Hornet caught the arresting wire, going from 150 miles per hour to 0 in 2 seconds. It's a violent, controlled chaos. It's what I do. It's who I am. But today, my mind wasn't on the mission. It was on a scheduled FaceTime call. I stepped inside the island superstructure, finding a quiet corner in the flag bridge where the satellite signal was strong. I propped my iPad up against a logbook and hit the call button. The screen pixelated for a moment, the eternal struggle of Navy Wi-Fi, before resolving into a bright, clear image. "Aubrey, can you hear me?" My mother's face filled the screen. But it wasn't the face of the woman I had left in September. That woman had been gray, shrinking, and apologetic. This woman was vibrant. She had cut her hair into a chic short bob that framed her face. She was wearing a colorful scarf tied loosely around her neck, and there was a smudge of cerulean blue paint on her cheek. A callback to the day we painted the living room. "I hear you loud and clear, Mom," I smiled. "You look busy." "Oh, honey, it's madness here," she laughed, turning the camera. She wasn't in the kitchen. She was in a studio space with high windows. Easels were set up in a circle, and half a dozen other women, all around her age, were laughing, mixing paints, and drinking iced tea. "We're working on landscapes today," Mom explained, flipping the camera back to herself. "I'm trying to capture the Blue Ridge Mountains, but my green is coming out a little too muddy. What do you think?" She held up a canvas. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it was bold. It had strong lines and bright colors. It was the work of someone who wasn't afraid to make a mark. "I think it's beautiful," I said honestly. So, this is the famous art group? The Golden Palettes, she declared proudly. We meet twice a week. And guess what? Next weekend, 4 of us are piling into the car and driving up to Asheville to see the Biltmore estate. Linda has a timeshare, and she invited us all. You're driving? I asked. I am, she nodded. I got the oil changed in the sedan yesterday, checked the tires myself. I'm the designated driver because, well, I'm the only one who navigates without yelling at the GPS. I felt a lump form in my throat. 6 months ago, this woman was afraid to buy groceries without permission. Now she was planning road trips with her girlfriends. That sounds amazing, Mom. You deserve it. Oh, before I forget. Her eyes twinkled with a mischievous light. You'll never guess what I heard from Mrs. Gable at the VA. Do tell. Well, she lowered her voice, leaning into the camera like a teenager sharing a secret. Apparently, our friend Mark moved down to Sarasota, Florida, the Sunshine State. Good place for snakes, I noted dryly. He tried to work his magic on a wealthy widow he met at a golf course. Mom continued, unable to suppress a grin. She owns a chain of car washes. Apparently, he tried to move in after 3 weeks and asked to be put on her country club membership. She didn't just dump him, Aubrey. She had her lawyer serve him with a restraining order for harassment. I laughed out loud. It was a deep, satisfying belly laugh that made a passing lieutenant look at me with surprise. Karma, I said. It's efficient. I don't even hate him anymore, Mom said, her expression turning thoughtful. I really don't. I just feel sorry for him. He spends his whole life trying to control people because he can't control himself. It must be exhausting. It is, I agreed. That's why he'll always be running. And you? You're standing still, but you're moving forward. Mom looked at me through the screen, her eyes soft. I wouldn't be here without you, Aubrey. You woke me up. You showed me the truth. You did the hard work, Mom. I just turned on the lights. We talked for another 10 minutes before she had to go. The Golden Palettes were demanding her attention for a critique session. Love you, Admiral, she waved. Love you, Mom. Drive safe. The screen went black. I sat there for a moment in the silence of the bridge. I looked out the reinforced glass window at the endless horizon. In the military, we talk a lot about legacy. We talk about battles won, territory secured, medals earned. For 30 years, I thought my legacy would be written in the logbooks of these ships. I thought it would be defined by the rank on my collar. But looking at my mother's smiling face, seeing her covered in paint, surrounded by friends, planning her own journey, I realized I was wrong. The greatest victory of my career wasn't over a foreign adversary. It wasn't navigating a typhoon. It was in a living room in Virginia Beach, helping a 70-year-old woman realize she didn't need a passenger in her life who was constantly grabbing the steering wheel. There is a verse in the Bible, John 8:32. I used to hear it in Sunday school, but I never really understood it until now. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Mark lived in a prison of lies. Lies about his rank, lies about his money, lies about his manhood. He trapped my mother in that prison with him. The truth, the cold, hard truth of who he was and who she was, had shattered the bars. I stood up and walked out to the catwalk. The wind whipped at my hair. I took a deep breath of salt air. My mother was driving to the mountains. She was driving her own car, on her own gas, with her own friends. She wasn't asking for permission. She wasn't apologizing for the route she took. That is freedom. And as I looked out over the Pacific, knowing that thousands of sailors were relying on me, I felt lighter. Because I knew that back home, the person who mattered most to me was finally, truly, safe. Not because I was protecting her, but because she had learned how to protect herself. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my mother's journey, it is this. Your silence does not buy your peace. It only buys their comfort. We often think that keeping the peace means swallowing our dignity. But true peace only comes when we set firm boundaries. Whether you are dealing with a financial predator like Mark or just someone who makes you feel small, remember that no is a complete sentence. You are the captain of your own ship. Do not let anyone else take the wheel and steer you into a storm. It is never too late to reclaim your command. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand your ground against someone who underestimated you? Or maybe you are currently helping a loved one find their voice. Share your story in the comments below. This community is here to listen and support each other. If you enjoyed seeing justice served today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share more stories of resilience and truth. Until next time, stand tall, keep your eyes on the horizon, and never apologize for shining your light.